Hello. Happy Friday to you. Welcome to the Stockout. The Stockout is the FreightWaves show about CPG companies. Those are consumer packaged goods companies, supply chains, and CPG company supply chains. I'm your host, Mike Baudendistel of FreightWaves. I'm an analyst and market expert here at FreightWaves. And every Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern, we do a show, really with the intention of trying to get closer to the shipper community, really understand what their concerns are and sort of how those fit in with other trends that we're seeing across the very broad coverage of logistics and transportation that we have here at FreightWaves. And today, I'm going to be talking about the biggest CPG news story of the past week, at least from my perspective, which was this cyber attack on JBS, one of the biggest meat producers. And I think that caused a lot of tension, really since Memorial Day weekend. But I'll give an update on where that situation is. I think it's good news for the time being, and also give an update on some of the other news stories in the world of CPG. And I'll break down the JM Smucker Company's fourth quarter earnings report, which they reported yesterday morning, and I'll talk about takeaways for CPG companies at large, and freight transportation logistics within this consumer products space. So I'll do that during the show. But first, a word from our sponsor, Echo Global Logistics. Trust the experts at Echo Global Logistics for all your freight transportation and CPG shipping needs. Whether you are a Fortune 100 CPG company or a specialty food manufacturer, Echo has solutions to fit your needs with their dedicated team, as well as EchoShip, a self-service shipping portal allowing you to quote, book, ship, and track. Echo has you covered. Technology at your fingertips and experts by your side 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. To find out how Echo can simplify your transportation management, please visit www.echo.com/CPG today. So big thanks to Echo Global Logistics for supporting this show. But first, I'll get into sort of the topic that I think has been on most people's minds that are in the food space, which is CBS or JBS cyber attack. The big meat company, and it does seem like it's another day, another cyber attack. Just saw that Biden administration is looking into the cryptocurrency's role in facilitating cyber attacks. It's going to be a topic between the administration and the Russians during the next meeting. So this is getting to be a big issue for a lot of companies. We've seen it in transportation companies, and now we're seeing it in the food space. And JBS is still in the process of recovering. The cyber attack shut down its beef processing facilities in 6 states, as well as plants in Australia. This took place starting over Memorial Day weekend. Was announced June 1st. So the timeline is that company said servers supporting North American and Australian IT systems were targeted of organized cyber attack. So it does seem like this was a criminal attack from Russian group that has been involved in other attacks. Sort of the good news is this does seem like it's coming to a fairly speedy resolution. They did say that as of 6 p.m. Eastern yesterday, the company did have a resolution, and the factories are starting to get fully operational. And they also said that they should be able to contain the loss of food produced, during the attack to 1 day's worth of production, and that any of the lost production to the company's global business should be recovered by the end of next week. So, initially when this happened, there were spikes in prices and those things, and a lot of concern. And I think some of those concerns are beginning to be alleviated. That wasn't clear to me. I didn't see whether they paid a ransom the way that the Colonial Pipeline situation what took place in that case. But nevertheless, they seems like they've started getting back to normal. But at the time, I think it was pretty crippling. JBS was having a difficult time performing basic tasks like clocking in employees, weighing poultry. I think it caused a lot of issues for companies that were delivering the animals. They just didn't know when they could be delivered, and those type of things. And I think this is worth highlighting, not just because it was sort of the topic of the hour, but also because food companies and a lot of those products do go into consumer packaged goods. Do seem to be the sort of easy, not necessarily easy targets, but sort of targets that sort of come to light here. And we've seen this at other food companies like Miller Coors, Mondelez, the maker of Oreos, among other snacks, Arizona Beverages, Wendy's over the past few years. So a lot of these, have targeted food companies, and I think the reason for that is there's potential for spoilage, and it's just there's this immediate need for those type of companies to get to a speedy resolution. So maybe that does make it more likely to pay a ransom to just get the issue behind them. And also, other thing that was interesting here was it seems like it's possible this could cause a renewed focus on consolidation in the meat industry. Did notice that Senator Chuck Grassley, who's a Republican of Iowa, said that made some comments. I mean, he's long been a person who's suggested that there's too much consolidation in the meat industry, and there are a couple of good quotes from him, saying, well, if there were 10 or 20 big meat producers instead of 4, that would make the food supply chains much less vulnerable to these types of attacks. But it does seem like companies in food and CPG really do need to sort of redouble their efforts to improve their cybersecurity. Not unique to this industry by any stretch, but it does seem like their targets. You also wonder if it something to do with the timing of it, with being a Memorial Day weekend, a time when a lot of people will grill meat, and sort of choosing that as sort of the right time to stage an attack. So it's definitely something for CPG companies to focus in on, to make any effort to prevent those type of issues from happening to them. Also in news in the world of CPG, Treehouse and Post entered into a definitive agreement where Post Holdings, so you think of Post as being a CPG company that makes cereal, they're going to acquire Treehouse's ready-to-eat cereal business. For those who are not familiar with Treehouse, is one of the biggest companies that makes consumer packaged goods for private label brands. So companies like Trader Joe's, or companies like that, Aldi, those type of companies. You go into those stores in Trader Joe's, and most of the products are Trader Joe's brands. A lot of those are made by Treehouse. And so with this deal, Post will acquire the entirety of Treehouse's ready-to-eat cereal business. Sort of the interesting thing here is that this same deal was nixed by the Federal Trade Commission in January of last year. So let's call it a year and a half ago. And at the time, it came to an agreement for $110 million, and they said it was basically anti-competitive, because that would give Post 60% of the private label cereal market. So not 60% of the total cereal market, but those that are private label brands, because that's entirely the space that Treehouse operates in. And what's different about this deal, it was $85 million. So the valuation did come down quite a bit in the last year and a half. And there is the potential that with that lower valuation, sort of being below that $100 million threshold, that maybe this does not get the same degree of scrutiny that this deal got early last year. So we'll keep an eye out for that, which will give us more indication of to what regulators will accept in terms of consolidation in the private label food space. Next topic I flagged to talk about is the Tyson CEO, Dean Banks, resigned after just 8 months. What's kind of unusual about his hire, 8 months ago, was that he didn't have any prior meat experience, as I just sort of mentioned earlier. The meat industry, very consolidated industry. They do tend to, have people who have been in the meat industry their whole life, and a lot of those executive roles, sometimes coming from another meat company, sometimes just promoting from within. But there are some idiosyncrasies there, and Tyson now has had 5 CEOs in 5 years, sort of at a time when they are rolling out additional products to compete more heavily in the alternative meat space. We've seen success from some companies in the alternative meat space I've talked about, like Impossible Foods. I've talked about them a lot on other shows. But Tyson's developing some of their own products to sort of compete more heavily in that space. I think because those are some of the faster growing markets, and also sort of a hedge. You don't know how it's sort of too soon to tell, how consumers are really going to take to some of those alternative, meat products. The CEO, this outgoing CEO, Dean Banks, is being replaced by COO Donnie King, who has worked at Tyson for more than 3 decades. And so that's what I would call a sort of a more traditional hire. So, we'll see if Mr. King takes the company in any new direction. But I think that's something to watch for, also in the world of meat. So with that, as a little bit of a rundown of the news to start, I'll get into my topic of the week, which spent part of the day yesterday looking at the JM Smucker Company, and drafted up a newsletter that I sent out yesterday. And if you're not on the newsletter subscription list and you would like to be, please go to www.freightwaves.com/the Stockout. And you can sign up for that. Try to get 2 of them out every week. So yesterday, JM Smucker Company, they reported their fiscal fourth quarter. They're on an April 30th year end, so a little bit of a different time frame than some of the others. Shares were up a little bit, up about 4 to 5% in the last 5 trading days or so. So and I think in general, people were happy with the results. I think these were a little bit ahead of analyst expectations. They because this was their fiscal fourth quarter, they did provide an outlook on fiscal 22, which I think was a little bit ahead of the expectations. They said the earnings would decline in a range of 0, so flat to down 5%. But when you consider the fact that they've made some divestitures, like the Crisco brand, among others, that were not fast growing segments, if anything, declining segments, their EPS is expected to be sort of +1 to down 4%. Right. I guess it's down 1 to +4, excluding the divestiture. So actually, a little bit of sort of normalized EPS growth, which comes after a very strong 2020 that was strong for them, in addition to being strong for a lot of other CPG companies, with all of the eating from home, which benefits Smucker as we sort of go to this hybrid work schedule. So they're selling more products for consumption in the morning, for breakfast, and also at lunch. Another sort of takeaway here is they're raising prices. I've talked a lot about various CPG companies raising prices. Smucker is no exception. It's really something they have to do to help offset inflation. A company is seeing inflation of some products in the high single digits to low double-digit increases on a portion of their costs. And you sort of put that all together, and their total cost of products sold is inflating about a mid-single-digit increase in fiscal 22 versus 21. So call it around that 5% range. And so in response to that, Smucker is implementing price increases across most of its product lines, and the price increases are going to be in the low to mid single digits. So the low to mid single digit price increases, that's against high single digits, double digit, let's call it mid single digit cost increases. And so the price increases are going higher, less at a lower rate than the costs are rising. So there is going to be some margin contraction. They talked about margin contraction of 87 basis points. And what you see there on the screen, for those watching the video, is you see the breakdown of their cost of products sold, which I think is helpful. I mean, a lot of CPG companies haven't done that, but with inflation being the sort of the topic of the hour, really in the economy, they've given a better breakdown there. And you see, freight costs being 8%, which you think of that as, okay, well, that's smaller than those other components, but that still translates to $387 million of freight spend. And as part of our argument at FreightWaves is, big company like that, you get just a little bit, smarter on freight by, leveraging some of our data, some of our articles, some of the experts here at FreightWaves, it really can translate, to saving a lot of money. So if they save 1% of their freight costs, a company that large would save $4 million. And then the other thing I'd highlight about this pie chart here is all of those segments are very highly inflationary. So that sort of speaks to just how big of an issue inflation is currently. I mean, you think of ingredients and what's included in some of those things. All these agriculture products, whether it's corn or soybeans. I mean, those are way up versus last year. In a lot of cases, basically double where they were. Last year. Packaging is an area that's highly inflationary with rising costs for chemicals and petroleum. Contract manufacturing. That's something that some of the CPG companies went to during the surge last year when there were so many companies making more CPG products to facilitate the consumption at home. So they've gone into that more heavily, and of course labor is costs there are rising as well. So you basically have each of these buckets rising pretty significantly, and even though they say, well, a portion of their costs are not really rising, and the ones that are going up, at least close to double digits. I mean, it does create an issue for a company, like Smucker, to raise prices. And what's interesting is, they're raising prices a little bit less than their costs are inflating, and the idea is they don't want to lose share to some of the lower priced private label brands. And in some cases there's exceptions, like the Folgers brand of coffee. They're already sort of occupying the mass market there, and coffee tends to be much less elastic. But they do sort of acknowledge that there's elasticity in some parts of their business, their product lines, where there's alternatives to go down for consumers to go down to private label, sort of more generic brands. So the company's planning for a reduction in volume this year, in volume combined with mix, in the low single digits. And that was another thing that I think was probably a little bit better than most analysts were expecting. A year ago, so many people were clearing shelves, getting their pantries and refrigerators in order, and I think people were expecting that to be drop off a little bit more. Companies expecting a revenue decline of 2 to 3%, but I thought they made the argument well, that when you look at their business on a 2-year stack, sort of compare their 2021 basically fiscal 2022 or calendar 2021 versus 2 years ago, they're better in really most metrics than they were before the pandemic hit. So they're really probably the better way to look at their business. And another sort of interesting sort of takeaway that for me is the company made some interesting comments on pet food. Now, pet food is Smucker's largest segment. You do sort of think of Smucker as jam and peanut butter, but pet food's their largest segment. It's about 36% of their revenue, and we've seen this from them and from other companies, that the pet food is growing a lot faster than other types of consumer products, or those consumer products that feed people are basically a slow growth market for the most part, with the exception of some healthier products. But pet food, because of the adoption in pets in the last year, the pet population actually grew a high single-digit percentage, in the last year. So we've seen growth, particularly from Nestle, where their pet business is growing, nicely. And within pet food, the treats are growing faster than the food. So presumably, people are still spending, in the past quarter, spending more time at home or with this hybrid work, treating their pets more often. So the pet treats, and Milk-Bone is one of the segments that Smucker has. Those are doing pretty well here. It does seem also, another interesting comment on pet food is that new pet owners who have not owned pets before the pandemic are showing more of a willingness to spend more money on their pets. Opt for those higher end products. Things like fresh pet foods. There's some companies that just sort of focus in on fresh pet foods. And sort of my perception is that a lot of the people that have adopted pets over the past year, really the biggest barrier previously was all the travel that they were doing. And I get the sense that these are most of the new pet parents, pet owners, are people who sort of maybe don't have kids, maybe relatively high income demographic, and they do seem to be willing to spend on the more premium types of pet foods that are healthier, that are fresher. Also interesting is that pet food is the segment where Smucker has seen the greatest shift to e-commerce. by far. They said, sort of coffee's number two, pet food number one. So that's where a lot of the shift has been. Presumably because those don't need to be, pet food does not need to be refrigerated, as typically, some of it does, but most of it doesn't. And they said overall 12% of their total sales are e-commerce, and way up, of course, from the beginning of the pandemic. So people are buying more food and more pet food and buying it online more often. The other interesting takeaway for me in terms of supply chains within Smucker, there was one analyst question regarding their inventory levels, and inventory levels I think are interesting right now. I mean, currently the freight transportation volumes sort of across North America are really at an elevated level. And part of the reason they're elevated is because the import volume is surging, but also there's been this big push on the side of retailers and consumer goods companies to rebuild their inventories. A lot of those inventories were destocked during the last year as consumers actually spent more on goods. And this graphic here shows the inventory to sales ratio in blue, and then the year-over-year change in the inventory to sales ratio in green. And so traditionally the inventory to sales ratio has declined as over the years as companies have adopted more of a just-in-time inventory regime. But lately it's actually risen, sort of with the exception of this past year. It's risen because of this greater shift towards e-commerce, and Amazon has created customers' expectations that they want everything within an hour, within a day, et cetera, and that requires more inventory closer to consumers. Now, in the past year, there's been so much consumption and there's been so much supply chain disruption that there's really not a lot of products in inventory. And so you see here how, if you go sort of before the pandemic and recession, we were up at about 1.6, 1.5% inventory to sales ratio. Now that's down 1.09, and you can see that's down 14.8% year over year. So inventories are thin. And one of the analysts asked Smucker pretty directly, sort of, when do you expect your inventories to be rebuilt? And they said basically within the next few months. They said by the end of their first fiscal half, which would end October 30th, because they're on an April fiscal year end. They said they expect their inventory rebuilding for the most part to be intact. And I think that's an important question for transportation companies in general, and just for transportation rates and demand, because I think there's the rates and the capacity crunch that we've seen in freight transportation should ease when some of those inventories, once they are corrected. I think right now there's a big push, particularly for companies that are importing goods. They are not waiting for the traditional fall peak season to get those goods imported. They want them imported now, and so the import volumes are way above what you would typically see in early summer. I think once those inventories normalize, you could see a cooling off in freight demand and some loosening up in transportation capacity, which right at the moment transportation capacity is really tight in a lot of different modes. You see that at the ports, you see that in domestic intermodal where there's not enough containers, and of course you see it in the truckload where the more loads are falling through the routing guide into the spot market. And so the inventories, I think, is a really important question. And from there, I think that sort of leads into the main sort of question I think came up this week in the world of transportation. Was helping our journalist Joanna Marsh yesterday, who focuses primarily on the railroads and intermodal issues. And I think there's no question that the transportation markets are sort of red hot right now. I think we could show that in 100 different sonar charts. But I think when you sort of look forward to the end of this year, I think the main question is, are those inventories going to get corrected? And then is what we're seeing right now a pull forward from what would traditionally come into the country in imports during the end of the year? Is a lot of that going to be pulled forward into, let's say, the middle part of the year in the summer, and then we're going to have this fall off at the end of the year? I think that's a reasonable expectation. On the other hand, the economy is growing 6%, and that does tend to lead to a lot of spending on goods, even if there is some reallocation from spending on goods to travel and spending on services. At least so far in this sort of recovery from the pandemic, it doesn't seem to be sort of an either or. It seems like people are out spending money on travel, booking a lot of travel. A lot of consumers are going through those TSA checkpoints for the first time in a long time, and they're actually buying a lot of goods as well. Consumers are buying a lot of cosmetics, they're buying a lot of clothing, they're buying a lot of things to sort of facilitate getting out into the world, and so we'll see if that continues. But I think it'll be very interesting to see if what we're seeing now is simply, or for the most part, a pull forward of what would typically come later in the year. So with those thoughts, that's really what I wanted to go over today. I thought in general, Smucker, did well, and I'm glad that JBS cyber attack seems to not be as disruptive as I think some people feared initially. And we'll be back next Friday with another the Stockout show with more newsletters next week. And if you're not signed up for the newsletter, please go to www.freightwaves.com/the Stockout, and feel free to send me an email if there's topics you want me to cover at Baudendistel@freightwaves.com. And with that, hope everyone has a great weekend.